British politics is a circus. So we have a new prime minister now, and I call him British Obama, right? Because he is the first leader of color, and they want you to think that this guy is like some kind of, revolutionary thing, but he's really just part of the same old establishment. His name is Rishi Sunak. He's Indian, born in the UK from Indian parents, and he is now the British Prime Minister. Now, Liz Truss basically quit the job after 44 days. The funny thing is that neither of these people were elected. This guy, Rishi Sunak, he not only is unelected by the British people, he wasn't even elected by his own party, which is what makes this so insane. Usually, they have a leadership contest, okay? So because the Tories, the Conservatives, they won the general election, it's their mandate, and they can hold a leadership contest. Well, Boris Johnson, who was Prime Minister a few weeks ago, we're going through them like socks. We have 3 prime ministers in 7 weeks. Boris Johnson got in the race, and then he pulled out, and his rival, what was her name again? Penny Mordaunt, she dropped out. So this guy was basically handed the premiership. We're apparently a democracy, right? We have an unelected king and an unelected prime minister, but apparently this is a democracy. And by the way, we also lock journalists up in Belmarsh prison. So very democratic process, you can see, right? And I want to show you and introduce you to Rishi Sunak, because I think this guy is very, very, very interesting. When he was running for prime minister a few months ago, when it was Liz Truss and him, he basically had this air of like being extremely privileged. And he is, right? He is. But it's not about the privilege. It's about who he serves, who he works for. This guy comes from Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs is one of the biggest banks on earth. They profited greatly from the crash in 2008. It's one of the most powerful institutions on the planet. That's who he worked for. And he was also in a hedge fund. And he's worth about 700 million pounds. Let me show you what they wrote in the New York Times. So his parents saved money to send him to Winchester College, one of Britain's most elite and academically rigorous fee-paying schools. It's true, right? You guys remember the Eton schoolboy accent, right? Yes, sir, boy. Lovely. That's how they speak at Winchester, yes. You can see here number 4 on the list. Yes, rather good show. Mr. Sunak also went to Oxford and then to Stanford. According to the New York Times, he went on to make a fortune in finance, including a spell at Goldman Sachs, before winning a seat in Parliament in 2015, representing Yorkshire. Now, let me tell you a couple of things about this guy. A few months ago, and keep in mind, he's prime minister, but he didn't give a single statement, a single interview. There was no debate about his program. Like I literally have no clue. I have a good idea what, being that he's Tory, but he didn't even give make the minimum effort to give a fucking statement about his program. He just handed the premiership. But it's democratic, I promise you. His wife is a billionaire, okay? And she's Indian, and there was like a bit of a scandal a few months ago because her father is one of the richest men in India. There's this Indian company called Infosys, okay? So his wife, Akshata Murthy, she's a fashion designer whose father, Narayana Murthy, co-founded the technology giant Infosys and is one of India's richest men. So she's a billionaire, and she has like about 0.93, so it's not even 1%. But still, she has a 0.9% share in this company, in Infosys. And she gets around like 12 million pounds a year in dividends. And in order not to pay taxes, she was registered in the UK as a non-dom, which means non-domicile. And this is a little, loophole that goes back like to the 18th century or something. And so basically, while Rishi Sunak, who's now the prime minister, but he was the chancellor just before, while he was chancellor, he's making average people in Britain pay the highest taxes since World War II, since the 1940s. At the same time, his wife is like stashing away tens of millions of pounds each year, right? Like, that's already one issue. But when you're making regular people pay through the nose and you're not paying crap, that's called gaming the system. And speaking of gaming the system, he had a green card. This guy had a green card in the US while being the chancellor in the UK. Look, a green card means you're a permanent resident in the United States of America. in order to be the chancellor in the UK, you have to be living in the UK and working there. How can you be living in the US while you're working in the UK? And when that came out, he had to give the green card up last year in October. So I'll just go back to the New York Times article. So he and his wife, they own homes in London, Yorkshire, Santa Monica, etc., etc. You know, we don't want to hate on this guy just because he has a good education. Nothing wrong with that. But it's what he did after college, after school, which is the concerning part. So he's from Goldman Sachs, from the hedge funds. And I actually recall this stuff they put in the article. A few months ago, there was a photo op where he didn't know how to pay for gas at a gas station, and a report that he had worn a pair of Prada loafers worth £490, so that's $555 to visit a construction site, adding to concerns that he was out of touch. Yeah, out of touch is a very diplomatic way to put it. He's a snob. Okay, there's a difference between being privileged and being a snob. Okay, so this is Rishi Sunak in 2001. Listen to what he has to say here.
I have friends who are aristocrats, I have friends who are upper class, I have friends who are, working class, but I'm not working class.
Let's play that again.
I have friends who are aristocrats, I have friends who are upper class, I have friends who are, working class, but I'm not working class.
In the rest of that clip, what he does, he basically says, but I go and I speak to kids who are working class and I tell them I'm from Winchester and so on and so on. And, it's just amazing to me. You have so many prime ministers in the last years who haven't even been elected. Prime ministers who took office without a general election. It's a ton of them, isn't it? I call him British Obama. I'll tell you why. Because with Obama, they tried playing the same game of identity politics. Like, oh, look, he's the first black man to enter the White House. He's the first black president. Oh, yes, we can change. And then, like, what does Obama do? Like, he like stacks the cabinet with people from Wall Street and people from Big Pharma, and then he starts these using drones more and more, the dirty war on Syria, Libya, and he basically takes these 2 wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and like expands them into 7 wars, right? So there's literally no sector of American industry, and when I say industry, I don't really mean industry. I'm talking about the elites who run the industry that he didn't serve, right? Whether it's the weapons manufacturers, the banks, he bailed out Wall Street after the crash economy, like everybody. He paid and bailed out the people who ruined millions of Americans' lives and the world economy. And so, him being black was basically like nothing. It was a farce, they used that to make the White House and the American political establishment look like it's being, open-minded and progressive, but it really wasn't. He was just continuing the same policy as his predecessors, and that's Rishi Sunak. This guy, he might have Indian parents, but the people that he worked and works for, whether it's Goldman Sachs or... I'll read you this sentence in a second. The people in the city is basically a city of London. It's a district in London called the City of London, and it's the financial hub, right? So you have the Bank of England, HSBC, you have all these banks, and St. Paul's Cathedral and Old Bailey Courthouse. So you have all this massive power, the church, the judiciary, and the banks, the financial system, in like 1 square kilometer, and with their own police force, right? So imagine Wall Street had their own police force, separate from the NYPD, and with special status, right? Like its own borough. Can you imagine that? That's what it's like. And I want to read you the sentence here. This is from Financial News London, and they said, when speculating on what a Sunak government will be like, many in the city, so the City of London with capital C, will take comfort from his years of experience working in investment banking and hedge funds. Yeah, I fucking bet they will, right? So it's not, regular people can relax now, they can sleep at night knowing that the blowback from sanctions and the crashing pound, all of this is going to be fixed, the cost of living crisis will be fixed. No, it's people in the city. Hedge fund managers, bankers, they can rest easy because he's one of them. That's what they're saying. And I didn't need to read you that for you to understand. So once again, they're trying to use identity politics as a cover for a guy who basically worked for and works for white European Western capitalist institutions. That's it. Just like Obama. They're cut from the same cloth. There is no difference. Right? They serve the same people. They work with the same people. They're friends. It's all one club. there are people who are saying, well, this is great because he's Indian, and obviously India used to be colonized by Britain, and it was plundered, right? It was just 200 years of exploitation and colonialism, and we've talked about this a lot. I talk about this a lot on the channel. And yes, I understand it. Like, Britain was in India, and now Britain has an Indian prime minister or Indian origin prime minister. Fine. Well, why don't, there are many countries who were colonized by Britain. Why don't you give it to a Palestinian then? Since you're just handing the job out after all, right? Why not give it to a Palestinian? Palestine was a British mandate. Palestinians still don't have a state because their country was carved up and given to Israeli, to Jewish settlers by the British government. Right? You want to do some form of reparations? Well, there you go. That's one idea, huh? Since you're so keen on it. But of course, they're just using this as a ploy, right? It's like, oh, look, he's the first Indian prime minister. They don't tell you, oh, he's a banker and he will serve the banking elites. I want to show you just Liz Truss, her outgoing speech. And she was prime minister for 44 days. 44 days. That's not even 2 months. And for the rest of her life now, she will receive £115,000 a year, what they call an allowance. So she worked as prime minister for 44 days, and worked as being generous. Even if she were there for 400 days, I don't think you could say that she deserves it, or any of them deserve it. But now she can claim that for the rest of her life. And what did she do? She did nothing. She just continued the pro-NATO policy. The war in Ukraine, the war on Russia, the same policy supporting Israel. She wanted to even move the embassy, the British embassy, from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which, they whine about, international law, Ukraine, it's territory, and they're fine destroying Palestinian territory. They're fine violating UN resolutions that are not favorable to Israel. That's okay. Go ahead, do your thing, right? So she wanted to do what Trump did, right? All those people screaming about Trump, they're silent about her doing same thing as him. She didn't in the end, but she almost did. And now she gets to reap the benefits and fail upwards, right? So I'll just play a short clip of her leaving number 10 down the street.
I came into office at a time of great economic and international instability. Families and businesses were worried about how to pay their bills. Putin's illegal war in Ukraine threatens the security of our whole continent. And our country has been held back for too long by low economic growth. I was elected by the Conservative Party with a mandate to change this. We delivered on energy bills and on cutting national insurance. And we set out a vision for a low-tax, high-growth economy that would take advantage of the freedoms of Brexit.
Yeah, sure.
I recognise, though, given the situation, I cannot deliver the mandate on which I was elected by the Conservative Party. I have therefore spoken to His Majesty the King to notify him that I am resigning as leader of the Conservative Party.
She's about as interesting as a doorknob. And her tax cut scheme, was basically like more, trickle down economics. Like, I'm going to give these huge slashed tax cuts for the richest people so they don't have to pay anything. And that's going to benefit the economy with growth and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, that worked out very brilliantly. The pound is at its lowest since 1971, I think, right? Somewhere around there. So, since before I was born. That's how bad it is. And again, I wouldn't blame her only, because to blame her and the chancellor that she put in, Kwasi Kwarteng, would be to kind of omit the role of the sanctions. It's the sanctions as well, right? It's both of those things. The EU deserves a lot of criticism, like, no doubt. But I'm really puzzled by people who thought that severing the UK from the European Union, when it's like literally next door, who are you going to find as a trading partner? You just can't replace it. And I think she wanted to do a free trade deal with Israel and Australia. Like, they're trying so bad to compensate for the free trade loss with Europe by going to the other end of the planet. It's just not happening, man. This is not the 1920s. You don't have a fleet of Royal Navy ships and an empire. Britain is just not that relevant anymore. It's just not. Just embarrassing stuff. Let me play you Rishi Sunak. He's the new prime minister, apparently. Right, so this guy's unelected, but he's the prime minister for some reason.
I'd like to pay tribute to Liz Truss for her dedicated public service to the country. She has led with dignity and grace through a time of great change and under exceptionally difficult circumstances, both at home and abroad. I am humbled and honoured to have the support of my parliamentary colleagues and to be elected as leader of the Conservative and Unionist Party. It is the greatest privilege of my life to be able to serve the party I love and give back to the country I owe so much to.
Yeah, all right, you get the idea. By the way, excuse me, I when I said earlier a free trade deal with Israel, I didn't mean Israel, I meant the Gulf countries. And of course, at the same time, she also wanted to move the embassy, and there was this whole like discussion like, oh, well, if she moves the embassy to Jerusalem, that might jeopardize the GCC deal and so on. But, the point still stands. They're trying to compensate for it, and it's just not going to happen. It's just not working. But I wouldn't say that that's the main reason for what's happening with the pound. It's really the sanctions more than anything. It's just so funny watching these headlines. Like, look at these headlines, man. This is from The Guardian. Rishi Sunak to become first British Prime Minister of color and also the first Hindu at number 10. Here's from the LA Times. Rishi Sunak to be Britain's new Prime Minister, the first person of color in the role. And back to the New York Times. Rishi Sunak will make history as the first person of color to be Britain's Prime Minister. It's like Biden's entire cabinet, right? Like which I called the Rainbow Coalition death cult, right? Uncle Joe's Rainbow Coalition death cult. It's like, oh, okay, we're going to have transgender people who can join the army now. The army that's going to be used to kill people and invade their countries and occupy them, like in Syria, Or we're going to have a black head of the Pentagon, Lloyd Austin, who is going to use the Pentagon to pursue the same crap like AFRICOM, where they've got a military presence in 51 African countries. They're continuing to occupy the Middle East. Like, how does that benefit black people in America and outside America? It doesn't. It benefits the weapons manufacturers. That's who it benefits. You know why? Because the color of his skin isn't the issue. It's his policies, which are the same. The policies are the same. It would be nice to have first Prime Minister of color or first black Secretary of Defense if their policies actually were in line with what you claim they are, right? That they are good for people of color. They're not. You're still continuing the policies of their white predecessors that oppress people of color in the country and outside the country. So that doesn't benefit anyone. You're using that as a cover. It's what it is, identity politics, and in a bad sense. I think identity politics originally, when it was coined, it was supposed to have a positive connotation. But today, the way that it's being used by neoliberalism to pull the wool over people's eyes and hide their actions and their policies by using people's skin color as a cover, that I think that's what gave it a negative connotation. And speaking of the Israeli embassy, Rishi Sunak, guess what? I swear to God, I said this just an hour ago with when I was having a conversation about Rishi Sunak. I wonder how long it's going to take him to make a statement in support of Israel, Britain's unwavering support of Israel. Here we go, right? Here we go. I'll show you something. This is from 24th of October. It's from today. Rishi Sunak, Britain's latest prime minister, believes there is a very strong case for moving the Israeli embassy to Jerusalem, and those who vilify Britain should be treated as extremists. Oh, man. I knew it. Like, there is no way that he could get the job without supporting Israel. Or supporting imperialism. It just doesn't work. This is Sunak, okay? He says, quote, the apartheid claim is not only factually incorrect, but quite frankly offensive. You know what's offensive? Apartheid. It's offensive to Palestinians. You have people in South Africa who actually lived under apartheid who have said that the apartheid against Palestinians by Israel is even worse. Like, just so you can gauge, obviously, both of them are unique stories and you should give them unique attention. But, like, for people to have lived under South African apartheid, to look at what's happening to Palestinians and go, that's worse, then you should care, right? Because most of the world, they care about apartheid in South Africa and say it was wrong. At the time, not many did. And it's the same thing now with Palestinians, right? Not many want to admit that it's apartheid. It is. If you want to take all these NGOs, Amnesty International, and all these major NGOs, they say that it's apartheid, and they're mostly used as tools for, regime change. I'm sorry to say, but if they even say it, I mean, come on. Sunak says, quote, like any nation, Israel is not perfect, but it is a vibrant multi-ethnic democracy with a free press and the rule of law. It stands as a shining beacon of hope in a region of autocracies and religious extremists. I'm pretty sure a country where Jews are viewed as superior to everybody else is religious extremism, right? Like saying this is our land because God gave it to us and I was here 3,000 years ago. Like that's religious extremism. Israel is literally founded on religious extremism. They hijack Judaism. They hijack being Jewish as a cover to take the land, just like the Crusaders did, ISIS. It's the same trick. They take the religion and use it as a cover. And he says it's a multi-ethnic democracy. It's only multi-ethnic because there are European settlers living on land stolen from Palestinians, and they weren't able to get rid of all the Palestinians. Many of them fled. Many of them left to Syria, to Jordan, and all the neighboring countries. You even have in South America tons of Palestinians who left. And there was a secret Israeli plan to deport Palestinians to Latin America. I'm not kidding. It's declassified recently. The free press thing, like literally everything he said in the sentence is complete horse crap. The free press is also a lie because when Palestine was a British mandate, they had a military censor, which Israel still has to this day. So if the military want the press not to say something, they can just go and muzzle the entire press and stop them from publishing something they don't want people to know. How's that for free press? The former Chancellor and now Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has also committed to passing a bill to crack down on the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. So that's BDS. That's basically a non-violent, peaceful protest against illegal Israeli settlements, right? So if there's a product, let's say it's a chair that was made in occupied Palestine, you don't buy it because it was made on stolen land, right? And it's funny, right? Because they don't let Palestinians protest it anyway. If they take up arms, which they're allowed to under international law, they call them terrorists. If you talk about it, they call you anti-Semitic. If you want to protest peacefully just by boycotting Israeli products, then this is also anti-Semitic, apparently. This is very democratic process here, right? And in the United States, it's pretty bad, too. They have, in some states, they've outlawed BDS as well. Again, it's not even a group. It's just the idea that I'm not going to buy anything that is made in occupied Palestine. That's it. Rishi Sunak would never, ever have gotten this job if he wasn't staunchly pro-Israel. Right, which again comes back to my point that if we're supposed to celebrate this because he comes from a country that was colonized by Britain and now he's leading Britain, then give it to a Palestinian, right? I suspect he'll keep the job a bit longer than Liz Truss because he's, going to let all the nice bankers and hedge fund managers in the city of London and Wall Street sleep peacefully. But if you are not a hedge fund manager and you are not someone who has 700 million or 1 billion pounds stashed away, well, screw you, because this guy was not put in power to serve us. He's put into power to serve them, the elites, the banks, and the corporation. There are some people, like the head of the Labour Party, Keir Starmer, who are saying that it's time for a general election. It's not fair to just give the job to Liz Truss and then give it to Rishi Sunak and have this internal leadership contest in the Conservative Party. And again, with Sunak, the contest didn't even take place. There's just no one who Johnson and the other one dropped out, so he's just given the job. And the problem is that if you did have a general election, which would be the right thing to do, you wouldn't get a better result because the Labour Party is so alike to the Conservative Party that they are completely indistinguishable. And you need look no further than the slew of bills that were passed by Parliament in the last year and a half. The Spy Cops Bill, Overseas Operations Bill, Nationality and Borders Bill. They basically just passed the most authoritarian crap I have ever seen in my life. And apparently it's still a democracy. And guess what? Labour let that happen. They either voted for it or just stepped aside and let the bills through. So what's the difference? What are you going to get? the Labour Party doesn't have a left anymore because they purged it. They got rid of Jeremy Corbyn, Chris Williamson, anybody who is pro-Palestinian or to the left of them, they're gone. So it's kind of like in the US now. You just have two right-wing parties. You have the Blairites who've taken back control of the Labour Party, and you're left with choice between a shit sandwich and diarrhea soup. No thanks.